On September 22, 2023, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation discovered the remains of Suzanne Morphew during a search operation in Moffat-Saguache County as part of an unrelated investigation. The discovery came 3 years after her sudden disappearance on May 10, 2020, breathing new life into what had become a famous cold case that captivated national attention and raised serious questions about whether investigators had targeted the wrong suspect. Suzanne Morphew was born on April 11, 1971, to parents Jean and Adrian Alexandria, growing up with 2 brothers, David and Andrew. Those who knew her described Suzanne as an intelligent, thoughtful, and remarkable friend. In 1998, while in high school, Suzanne met her future husband Barry Morphew, and the couple married after 6 years of dating. Barry was a talented baseball player who had been signed with the Toronto Blue Jays, while Suzanne pursued a degree in education at Purdue University. Barry's athletic career ended prematurely due to a serious injury, prompting him to transition into the horticulture industry. Suzanne had been teaching for 4 years when Barry established his landscaping company, which steadily gained success. The couple had 2 daughters, Mallory and Macy, and maintained what appeared to be a picture-perfect life in Indiana until Suzanne was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. After beating cancer twice, the Morphews relocated to Maysville, Colorado in 2018 for a fresh start and to be closer to their daughter Mallory, who was attending Western State University. They moved to a gorgeous 7-acre property where Barry could hunt while still working as a contractor and volunteering as a fireman, while Suzanne retired from teaching to devote herself more to the church and take up new hobbies like mountain biking. May 10, 2020, Mother's Day, began differently than usual at the Morphew residence. Barry and the girls were away from the house, leaving Suzanne alone. Barry claimed he had a landscaping appointment in Broomfield, approximately 3 hours away by car, while the daughters had gone on a camping trip. The family had planned to return home that evening to celebrate Mother's Day with Suzanne, but the planned celebration never occurred. That evening, Mallory and Macy sent their mother messages wishing her a happy Mother's Day, but received no response. This struck them as unusual since their mother was very active on social media, and they expected her to be online viewing photos from her best friend's daughter's wedding. After several hours without reply, the daughters contacted their neighbor Martin Ritter and his wife to check on Suzanne. Mrs. Ritter arrived at the Morphew house around 4 to 4:30 p.m. and found it empty. She called Barry to explain the situation, and he instructed her to check for Suzanne's mountain bike and, if it was missing, to contact the police. Mrs. Ritter followed his instructions, and when police arrived at the Morphew residence, Barry and his 2 daughters made their way back home, desperate to learn of Suzanne's whereabouts and condition. Several hours into the search, police discovered their first solid clue that would turn the investigation on its head. 2 deputies found Suzanne's mountain bike off a steep ravine not far from the Morphew home. While the location initially suggested Suzanne might have been involved in a crash, the bicycle itself and the surrounding vegetation showed no signs of struggle. There were no skid marks indicating brake usage, no damage to the mountain bike despite its tumble down the ravine, no blood evidence, and the vegetation in the area remained undisturbed. Deputies concluded the bike had obviously been placed there by someone. When investigators presented this information to Barry, his reaction was considered bizarre, as he suggested a mountain lion might have been responsible for his wife's disappearance. This peculiar mountain lion theory would prove to be the first of many outlandish stories and accounts Barry would provide to investigators throughout the search for his wife. Several individuals found Barry's handling of his wife's disappearance questionable. In a secretly recorded conversation with YouTuber Tyson Draper, Barry elaborated on his mountain lion theory. Additionally, Barry was noticeably absent from search parties organized by Suzanne's brother Andrew, who didn't believe Barry's story about the bike ride and suggested she might have been taken on May 9th instead of Mother's Day. Suspicion eventually shifted directly to Barry when Suzanne's helmet was discovered 1 mile from the Morphew home, in the exact direction that Barry's truck telemetry data showed he had traveled that morning. Investigators might have dismissed this as an odd coincidence if not for one critical detail. The location was in the opposite direction from the Broomfield construction site he claimed to be visiting that day. In his preliminary interview with officers, Barry claimed he had been awakened by his alarm clock around 4:30 a.m. and left straight for Broomfield. However, Telematic data from his Ford F-350 revealed he had driven 1 mile west before heading to the construction site. When confronted with this data, Barry provided what he considered a reasonable explanation, claiming he had been scouting elk that morning around 4:30 a.m. and was curious about their direction, so he could track them later. Barry apparently had a habit of tranquilizing elk and removing their antlers for sale. When officers pointed out he couldn't have spotted elk at 4:30 a.m. if he was supposedly just waking up, Barry amended his story, saying he hadn't set his alarm for 4:30 and had gotten up on his own. When questioned specifically about the day of her disappearance, Barry described it as one of the best days the couple had experienced in some time. He claimed he was working with a coworker in Salida that morning, returned early, went on a hike with Suzanne, and then they grilled steak and were intimate. He said they went to bed together and suggested it might have been the last time they saw each other. However, as investigators established, Barry proved to be an unreliable witness. When police began thoroughly investigating Barry, they discovered he had lied about virtually everything that happened that night. Investigators first knew something was wrong when they examined Barry's phone and vehicle telematic data from May 9, 2020. While Barry and Suzanne did spend the afternoon and evening together, the events didn't align with Barry's narrative. At 2:44 p.m., the first significant deviation from Barry's account surfaced as his phone data revealed erratic movements around the property. When confronted by investigators, Barry claimed he was likely hunting chipmunks with tranquilizers. At 2:47 p.m., Barry switched his phone to airplane mode, maintaining it until 10:17 p.m. Even the steak dinner he claimed to have shared with his wife was called into doubt when investigators found only one dirty dish instead of two. Later that night, additional peculiarities emerged from the Morphew property. At 9:30 p.m., an hour after Barry claimed to have gone to sleep with his wife, his vehicle moved in reverse, traveling 96 feet backward from the driveway. Investigators speculated this might have been when he loaded her body into his truck, if he was indeed guilty. From 3:25 to 3:48 a.m., records indicated the door to his truck opened and closed more than 80 times. Though circumstantial, the evidence strongly hinted at information Barry wasn't sharing with police, prompting a closer examination of the events of May 10th. Interviews with coworkers revealed that Barry was not supposed to be in Broomfield that day, as their contract wasn't scheduled to begin until a week later, meaning there was no project to inspect. According to Barry, he only visited the Holiday Inn, the job site, a local store for granola and water, and briefly stopped at McDonald's to clean his windshield. However, surveillance footage obtained by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation contradicted his account entirely. Barry was observed disposing of 5 trash bags near McDonald's and the Holiday Inn. When confronted with the footage, Barry provided an unusual explanation, claiming he wanted to clean his car without incurring proper disposal fees. Barry's explanation quickly unraveled when officers inspected his vehicle. A coworker also reported a strong smell of bleach and chlorine in Barry's hotel room the day after Suzanne's disappearance. Furthermore, investigators discovered that Barry had changed his clothes multiple times throughout the day. As damaging as Barry's actions appeared, investigators had yet to discover a clear motive. That changed when they delved deeper into the couple's personal lives. Barry and Suzanne's daughters revealed that both parents were not as happy as Barry wanted police to believe. Text messages discovered when investigators recovered Suzanne's phone and personal belongings from the house confirmed this troubling reality. To say the Morphews were experiencing marital problems would be a significant understatement. Suzanne was deeply unhappy in the marriage and had discussed how her husband refused to even consider divorce. In her notes app, she maintained a list of grievances that painted a pattern of physical abuse. Suzanne mentioned she was afraid to be alone in a room with Barry, expressed concerns about his drinking, documented repeated attempts by him to seize her phone, and even speculated that he had been unfaithful to her. When police executed a search warrant at the Morphew house on May 20th, they discovered a spy pen that Suzanne had purchased to catch her husband in the act. Ironically, it recorded her affair, not his. Her lover was a man named Jeff, with whom Suzanne had attended high school. The affair had allegedly continued for 1.5 years, starting around 2018. While Jeff initially appeared to be an obvious suspect, police were able to clear him of any involvement. Investigators believe Barry had somehow discovered the affair and a note Suzanne wrote 2 days before her disappearance corroborated their theory. Barry had accused her of having a boyfriend. The spy pen, while instrumental, was not the only vital piece of information uncovered during the search of the Morphew house. Investigators found the cap of a tranquilizer dart in the family's dryer, a spent bullet casing in the bedroom, a large crack in the door frame, and what they believed to be remnants of Suzanne's journal in the fireplace. All of these findings, combined with the telematic data, suggested Barry might have planned his wife's murder and killed her sometime in the afternoon of May 9, 2020. Phone data from Suzanne's device corroborated this timeline. After texting her boyfriend 53 times and sending him a selfie around 2:10 p.m., she never used her phone again. The public did not learn that Barry was a suspect in his wife's disappearance until 2 weeks later, when police carried out a 2-day excavation of a construction site in Salida, one of Barry's job sites. In response, Barry released an unusual video to the public declaring his innocence. Barry Morphew was not arrested until May 5, 2021, nearly a year after the investigation began. The evidence against Barry was largely circumstantial, but with the changing stories, repeated lies, and clear motive, the prosecution appeared confident in their case. Barry was charged with first-degree murder of his wife, tampering with physical evidence, possession of a dangerous weapon, and attempting to influence a public servant. As if these charges weren't severe enough, Barry was later charged with filing a fraudulent election ballot in Suzanne's name. He claimed he didn't know it was wrong, and that Trump could use the extra vote. Barry pleaded guilty to the charge and paid a $600 fine in August 2021. A preliminary hearing was held in August 2021 to determine if Barry Morphew's case would proceed to trial. During this time, most of the information regarding the case became public knowledge. Over 4 days, the prosecution methodically presented the evidence they had gathered and outlined what they believed had occurred. Barry killed his wife on May 9, 2020, dismembered her body in a hotel room, disposed of the tools used, and buried her body in an unmarked grave. Barry's defense, however, pushed back aggressively, poking holes in the prosecution's narrative. They pointed to the fact that cadaver dogs could not find any signs of human remains in Barry's car or the hotel room where he supposedly brought her body. They also alluded to the possibility that the dart cap might have been planted, noting visual inconsistencies in photographs taken of the dryer. One showed the cap in the dryer while another did not. The defense also stated it would have been impossible for Barry to have used his dart gun to aid in the alleged murder, since it was broken at the time. However, the defense team's most significant piece of evidence was the partial DNA they discovered in Suzanne's Range Rover and on her bike helmet, none of which matched Barry. What made this discovery particularly compelling was that the DNA found in her car matched DNA from 3 unsolved sexual assault investigations in Chicago and Arizona, raising reasonable doubt about Barry's guilt. The CBI investigator who collected the evidence went on military leave before he could follow up on the lead. To make matters worse, the defense was never informed of the existence of the foreign DNA matches and was learning about it for the first time during that hearing, meaning the prosecution withheld exculpatory evidence that could have aided the defense throughout the hearing. The defense argued that with the existence of another suspect with a criminal record, the prosecution did not have enough evidence to prove that Barry should be convicted of the killing of his wife. They asked the judge to rule quickly on his decision, but oddly he delayed his decision, citing the hundreds of man-hours and resources put into the case. It wasn't until September 7th that the judge decided that the case would move forward and set Barry's bail at $500,000. Barry walked out of county jail with his daughters on September 20th, 2021. 9 days before the trial was set to begin, the prosecution filed a motion to dismiss all charges against Barry without prejudice, which means the prosecution is free to restart the case at any point pending new information. Without a body, reasonable doubt about whether Barry committed the murder, and misconduct on the part of the prosecution, it would have been a hard win. The prosecution also missed several deadlines, which earned them sanctions that excluded 14 key witnesses from the trial. The world was shocked when news broke of the dismissal, and Barry could be seen exiting the courthouse with a big smile on his face and his 2 daughters with him. The breakthrough came on September 22, 2023, when a group of investigators dug up several shallow graves located in Moffett, Colorado, following an investigation. Suzanne's remains were identified with her dental records and chemotherapy port over 50 miles away from the projected search area, which was the mountains surrounding Barry's property. With the discovery of her body, people questioned if Barry could still be technically considered a suspect in the murder, since police are certain that Barry's truck was not in Moffett on May 9th and 10th. Some people have pointed out that Barry could have had help in disposing of her body, and he could have made the trip to Moffett to bury the body and head back. Perhaps if they got a subpoena for his phone and car data for a longer period, they might be able to link him to where Suzanne's remains were discovered. But for now, Barry seems to be in the clear. However, the police and district attorney's office have not thrown in the towel yet. The district attorney of the 12th Judicial District told CNN that the case is still under investigation, and she would not be able to comment until more information is known, but they did offer their condolences to Suzanne's family. Iris Eichen, Barry's attorney, has been very vocal since the body was recovered, hinting that it's more likely that Suzanne was one of the many victims of a serial killer since her remains were discovered in what she described as a boneyard. She believes that Barry was wrongfully targeted by law enforcement and hopes that they might eventually admit that they were wrong. In the meantime, Barry has begun a $15 million lawsuit against the prosecutors, sheriff stations, and many investigators, claiming he was wrongfully charged in the disappearance and death of his wife. The lawsuit was ultimately dismissed by a judge in September 2024. However, in a stunning turn of events, Barry Morphew was indicted again by a grand jury in June 2025 for the murder of his wife after new evidence emerged suggesting her body had been moved at least twice after she was killed. The case remains ongoing as investigators continue to piece together what happened to Suzanne Morphew on that fateful Mother's Day in 2020.